welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. And we are now beginning with our PATIO Conversations session number 9, which where we return to the tools of building practice. And in this theme, my colleague Sarah Melsons and I adopt a critical look at the various instruments like bills of quantities, contracts, drawings, and material infrastructures that underlie building practice. And we look at how different kinds of practitioners in building production use these tools, and we also define building practitioners and the tools also in a fairly inclusive way. So in this theme, we aim to historically map their deployment, mobilities, and transference across various geographies and cultures. And today we are delighted to have with us Swati Chattopadhyay and Megha Chand Inglis, who are joining us from California and London respectively. And we will shortly tell you about the core focus of today's theme and panel discussion. So it's a special format to our first anniversary, if you like, where we've circled through all the themes and then we've finished not technically a year, but we've returned to the first theme once again. So of course, we're gonna share the full biographies of our panelists in the chat, but to introduce them very briefly, Swati Chattopadhyay, who's a professor of history of art and architecture at the University of Santa Barbara in California, is an architect and architectural historian who specializes in modern architecture and urbanism and the cultural landscape of the British Empire. So she's the recipient of several awards, and I don't think I have the time to list them all, but in 2018 was named a Fellow of the Society of Architectural Historians for a lifetime of contributions to the field. Swati is also the author of several acclaimed books, for example, Small Spaces, which came out in 2024, Unlearning the City from 2012, and Representing Calcutta in 2005, amongst others. Megha Chand Inglis, who is Associate Professor at the Bartlett School of Architecture, University College London, is interested in familial imaginaries and genealogies of architectural practice and production at the juncture of global modernity in colonial, post-colonial, and transnational contexts. Megha's research more recently sits within the emerging field of production studies, which is a UK and Brazil-based transnational initiative, where she's also an affiliate researcher. Megha is committed to diversifying and decolonizing research and teaching, and has been active on various initiatives at the Bartlett and elsewhere, including co-organizing the 2022 History and Theory Forum on Teaching Race in the Architectural Humanities. So with that, I'll hand over to Sarah Melsons now, who's going to briefly introduce the core problems under discussion, and then we'll go into the panel discussion proper. Sarah, over to you.
Yes. So hello, everyone. As you know, the theme of our discussion today is tools of building practice, and I'll just briefly share in a different manner. But the specific tool that we want to focus on today is drawing matters. The drawing is hardly a neutral tool of building practice. Drawings are valued and powerful tools because they can represent the shape and materiality of buildings in a mobile and reproducible way. Yet it's important to remember that drawings always hide as much as they reveal. Yet, from a historical perspective, the drawing is the tool that enabled design to move away from the building site, and as one of the architect's prescriptive tools next to specifications, for example, it's played a crucial role in fostering the separation between manual and intellectual labor and in cementing the architectural profession's authority. Architects are not the only ones who produce drawings, however, nor are drawings, even when created by an architect, reflective of a single creative genius. Drawings form part of the larger system of architectural production. And in this session, we're interested in looking at drawings not necessarily to appraise the architectures they represent, but rather to reveal the systems of social relations within which architecture is produced. So what meanings are encoded in the detail and materiality of the drawing? Can the drawing become a site where authority is challenged? What do drawings deviate from architectural conventions tell us about alternative models of designing and building? I want to open this discussion by showing several examples from my own research. And I'll just try to do it in a manner where I'll briefly have to shift around a couple of things. Sorry. Yeah, so I wanted to show a couple of drawings which had been part of my PhD research, which was focused on architectural practice in Pune. And this drawing that we see right now is actually the 1987 development plan of Pune city. And while the base is a conventional zoning plan prepared at municipal level, what you see and what is of interest here is the blue annotations that are made on this plan. They capture the modifications that were made when the plan returned. So it was prepared at a municipal level, and it was revised and published at the state urban planning level. And these numbered blue marks refer to a list of modifications in the zoning legislation and in the reservations of the zoning, which were granted to particular plots of land in the final development legislation. They actually reflect the objections raised by landholders, often through their architects. Many zones originally reserved for low-income housing or public parks were converted into residential zones. So these annotations open up another related archival realm consisting of documentary tools such as payment receipts, landholding records, office files, and judicial files. And these tools were effectively wielded to modify and undermine the master plan as an expert instrument of instructive decision-making. Building permit plans also vary considerably over time as building cultures change, even though they follow a standardized plan elevation section format. Consider this building permit application for a bungalow from the 1950s. According to the architect, all the information necessary for the contractor to build the structure was already present in the building permit application. And you can see annotations referring to materials and construction techniques. According to him, no further working drawings were produced. Merely 3 decades later, the opposite became true. Pune architects working for real estate developers began producing increasingly abstract and open-ended building permit drawings. On the right, you see the elevation which was submitted as part of the building permit drawing. And despite the fact that these architects had more detailed facade designs ready, as you can see on the left, the elevation submitted hardly differs from a block plan. It's entirely stripped of ornamental and constructive details. And this wasn't because these architects were not interested in design. Rather, deviating from conventional drawing standards seems to have been a strategic choice to preserve flexibility for future design changes and to increase the drawing's bureaucratic legibility. So in short, we believe there's a lot that remains to be told about drawing matters, and it's a privilege to be hearing from Professor Swati Chattopadhyay and Professor Megha Chand Inglis on this topic at today's roundtable. I now hand back to Saptarshi to initiate the discussion. You're on mute, Saptarshi.
Okay, yeah. Can you hear me now? So, Sarah, thanks for that very interesting preface. So just to jump into the core of the matter, both our speakers today upset binaries in architectural historiography. So in part, this occurs through how they read drawings between the traditional and modern on the one hand, and also by questioning the binary of the modern and vernacular on the other. So I'm going to quickly share my screen because the work that I hope that our participants might have also received some of received the two articles which form the core of our discussion. So this work has appeared in a special issue of the Architectural Research Quarterly on Modernity and the Indian Temple in 2022. And we encourage you to also look at its fascinating collection of other research essays, like this incredible cover image, for instance, juxtaposes something that is completely temporary, like the scaffolding against this building, which is being the temple that is being built in stone. So I won't say much more about that, but just to return to the topic at hand, Megha questions notions of traditionalism associated with a Western Indian community of builders called the Sompuras. She debunks the imagination of a traditional builder as one, and I quote her, who is all too often portrayed as autonomous, hermetically sealed, and out of joint with the modern. End of quote. Shati, meanwhile, points out that the making of Durgapuja pandals helps us reimagine the process of vernacular or popular architecture in a way that, and I quote Shati, contingency rather than structure rules. End of quote. She argues that, and I quote again, pandal design, precisely because it's temporary, clarifies a large set of relationships about materiality that tend to remain beyond the purview of architectural inquiry. End of quote. So Megha and Shati, both your works show how so-called traditional or marginal actors in the building process appropriate modern drawing techniques in distinct ways. Megha, for instance, you speak of how diverse sources and technologies are used in the design and building practice of the Sompuras, and how encounters with the architectural profession or even an agency like the Archaeological Survey of India are activated in specific ways through conjunctures between the everyday production of drawings, treatises, sculpture, and buildings. Shati, your protagonist seems to withhold the representation of finality. You mentioned that the drawings are not always fully worked out, and instead you locate the drawing within a wider material practice in which workers are often confronted with unfamiliar raw materials or techniques to achieve complex and intricate results, even in an ephemeral architecture. So, along with my first question, I invite you both to introduce your respective research cases and your protagonists, the temple builders, Sompuras and the Durgapuja festival, which is a very different kind of middle space, of course, and also elaborate on the kind of drawings your protagonists use and at which moments in the design and building processes they occur. So what we'd like to know from you both in turn is where all within the building process, say for instance, in the making of a Durga Puja pandal or the Sompura's process of temple building, does the production and use of the drawing occur? Where does it appear? So, Shati, would you like to go first?
Sure.
Yeah.
Let me share my screen.
Okay. I'll just take down mine. I'll end sharing. Yeah.
So I thought I should explain the project a bit, the one that Sarah and Shaptarshi chose. So thanks for inviting me to this conversation. Some of you would have heard of some aspect of this presentation, or if you have read the article. I just want to still explain what the event is, because not everybody would be familiar with it. So this is part of this research is a collaborative work. I'm the PI, but I work with Tanya Sengupta and Arijit Sen, and it has been going on since 2017. It's a little overdue in terms of its publication, but that's what collaborative projects are like. But I think I always think about that research project as a bit like the event itself, except that that's really, the deadlines for that are really short and ours is not. Okay, that's what academic scholarship becomes, right? But in terms of the collaborative work, that you really don't know what the finished product is going to be. I mean, you might have an idea. And what Shaptarshi and Sarah wants us to talk about is, where does the drawing process, the architectural drawing, kind of fit into this. So let me give you a sense of what this is. The project is called Mapping the Ephemeral. And Durgapuja we are looking at the Durgapuja festival. It's a Hindu religious festival, very important in Bengal and the Bengali diaspora. So puja literally means worship. So this is an annual event in which literally thousands of temporary structures, pavilions are constructed. They're called pandals. In public space. And the ones we are looking at are actually out in like streets, parks, green islands and things like that, not within closed private premises, of which there are literally, thousands again. So what we did is that we actually mapped all of those in 2018, the locations, and sort of geolocated all of them, the numbers, etc. But personally, I have been working on this for a long time. There's a chapter in it, my Unlearning the City book. But when I looked at this event in 2017, actually, Tanya and I were visiting these pandals, and something occurred to me. Something has changed about Durgapuja pandals. In other words, it's an evolving sort of a design, like a event, and the basic structure for the overwhelming number of them is actually bamboo. And the use of bamboo in vernacular architecture occurs all over Southeast Asia. It's used for scaffolding across much of this region. So they start in sort of literally in open spaces, and depending on what you're looking at and the budget of they're organized by local clubs or associations. So they're very neighborhood-based events. And some of them could be really small, like the most modest one would be something like this. And I wanted to show you this architectural drawing that one of my research assistants produced. And this is a kind of a standard architectural drawing, translating it in our language, right? But it also, as you can see, it's rather, how should I put it, stiff, because it really doesn't kind of express what Durgapuja is about, because I don't think our architectural language is quite, drawing language is quite meant for that. But just to give you an example of what this is that you'll build a raised kind of platform for the deity, and then you'll have a shelter over it, and it would be sort of colorful. Now, the more elaborate ones are, and this one is just, on taking up the sidewalk. More elaborate ones are lavish affairs, and they can take anywhere between, the small ones might take a few days to build, and these, the max you're allowed to occupy public space, and this is by the Calcutta Police, is 3 months. And sometimes they actually take longer. But what often the builders do and the designers do is that the fabrication is done in workshops off-site and are brought to the site within the time period allowed. So you're looking at a work of the puja pandal of one of the designers who is in the Durga Puja circuit. He's not marginal. He's very well known, though he comes not from an architectural background at all. He does not come from an art background at all. He just learned the craft. And his name is Bimal Shamanto. And in 2017, I just happened to get introduced to him because I was taking photographs of one of these panels, which was being actually demolished. So he was interested in why I'm taking photographs of a panel being demolished, because he wanted to understand the structure. So some of the visual effects are stunning. And I always say, this can put any architectural biennale to shame in terms of the sheer lavishness and the scale of production. Imagine doing this kind of work every year. This is happening every year and in thousands of sites. And these are all, it's important to recognize that most of the material are either something that you can both assemble quickly and you can take off quickly, because that's the logic of it. It needs to be taken off after the 5 days of the event within a very few days, like 2 or 3 days. So once I got to know Bimal, he was very generous at sharing his notes and his drawings. And he has a very, what I would say, unorthodox way of dealing with it. Just to make clear that most of these panels do not have any drawings going into it at all, okay? But he kind of thinks through it because he has, again, he's not trained in art or architecture. He just has he has a calligraphic handwriting, and he kind of thinks through different parts of it. So these designers contract directly with the association, but the contract is nothing like an architect's contract. He doesn't know what the final product is going to be, nor do the organizers, okay? So it's a work in process. That's the way it is. So I'm going to show you some, so he was, while we were talking, actually, both Tanya and I were there at the time, he was drawing in front of us. So for every panel, he keeps a journal for that year and his thought process. So it's kind of lovely to hear. And in fact, I don't know of having seen, despite, being profoundly interested in architectural drawings, I have my own collection, this kind of thorough, systematic thinking over the course of several months. Architects habitually draw, but, it's still quite limited in terms of describing the process. So this is the drawings for the 2017 panel here. And this is the sort of the beginning drawings he had. So he's thinking about, okay, I need to put this in structure. By leaving enough space for cars to pass, there needs to be enough, you need to respect right of way. So he has to kind of think of that. And so he would draw a plan which looks like that. He's really interested in like noting down for himself the limits of what he can build, like the boundaries. But what there's something lovely about this drawing is that he did construct the basic structure with sort of it's a steel kind of a cage, I would call it, with sort of a narrow gauge bars. But some of these are actually meant to kind of stabilize it, connected to wrought iron grills and lampposts, etc., right, literally fixed to the infrastructure and the surrounding buildings. And this is fairly typical when it also is with bamboo. There's nothing exceptional. But I like showing this example because this panel told me something about the craft of building here that I found exceptional. And I wanted to understand what he was doing with bamboo. So this is a particular type of bamboo he sourced from the northeast part of India. And it's not the ones that you will use to do the scaffolding. Okay, those are actually kind of about 3-inch, 4-inch diameter bamboos, and there's a particular kind that's a mulibash actually in Bangla. So these are actually different kinds, the narrow gauge, but they were sort of when they were cut, they were fairly green. So they actually changed color while the construction is going on. And these kinds of details fascinated me and how he had imagined. And I like showing this image because I've never seen bamboo cut like this. You have to really imagine what the section is and so he had tried these out in workshops. But he has also done these drawings. Now, the structure in terms of what it does is really what I say responding to not just Durgapuja as a temporary event. The structure is temporary. It'll be taken down after 5 days of, the religious festivity. It is also responding very astutely, very sort of cannily to the ephemeral conditions of urban life. And I'm talking about the breeze, the light, the sun, the fact that the bamboo is changing color. There's something very dynamic about the process. And what some of you may be able to read if you read Bengali, others you will not be able to read. He's actually writing here, I'll actually connect this to the house. So he's actually thinking about what's next to it and how he can sort of not just locate the building in terms of the structure in terms of the buildings, but actually relate to them. But this is what I call touching softly. You're not really making a deep intervention that you cannot take off after a short time. So what is the art of touching softly or treading lightly? So this is the bamboo, for example. Again, those who care to notice would recognize the bamboo is changing color within a very short period of time, because that's what it does. And he is attentive to it, and he wrote this down. So for those, that small changes over short duration is important to him. And this is my last couple of images. So the other lovely thing I thought of what he did that year is that, he's also trying to do not just the panel itself, the structure itself within which the deity is going to be housed, but the surroundings. It's he's creating an environment. And there was a rather unsightly parking lot next to these houses. And he was building a little, and that's him, by the way. He was building a little kind of place for gathering. And normally you would just place fabric, just cover this up with fabric so you cannot see it. So you're kind of creating kind of a stage-like area. He did not. This is what he did with leftover pieces. This is not something he planned at all. By leftover pieces, he created a sort of ceiling, kind of a roof structure that brought attention to the sky and the tree right there, rather than the cars and the sort of unsightly parking lot. In other words, he knows how to take your eye somewhere else where it is, tells you something sort of pleasant about the neighborhood, the tree, the breeze. And this is a kind of time period, this is in fall, where you will have the sort of the pleasant breeze. It's summer is kind of gone, monsoons are hopefully gone. So it's a kind of a nice sort of sort of in between time, between seasons. So this kind of detail made me think more deeply about what the ephemeral and how is it different from the temporary. We might have a different conversation about that. I'll stop there and stop sharing.
Thanks, Shati, for that very comprehensive and insightful response. Megha, I'm going to bring you in now and also share the image that you could refer to. Or let me know when to bring it up. I can do that as well.
Yeah. So maybe I was thinking if you could bring up that cover image, and then I'll speak around that, and then I'll ask you. So thanks again. The image before that, yeah. So thanks again, Saptarshi and Sarah. It's just an absolute pleasure to be here and be in conversation with all of you, and especially Shati. So I think my responses are pretty much based on that article, but I'll also speak around that article, which is, it's called Living in the Archive. So the key protagonist in this piece of work is somebody called Balubhai, or Balakrishna Amritlal Trivedi. He's a protagonist, but also the objects and the way they're cared for are also protagonists. And I should also take a moment to say that Balubhai, who spent a lot of time with me nurturing my questions and talking to me, passed away in 2023. So it is with some sadness that I'm talking about this work and revisiting this work in gratitude, but also kind of reflective of this kind of method of engaging, which is quite contingent on companionship and being with others and reading materials with others. And Balubhai is part of a living community of temple builders. They're the Sompuras, who are located in Western India, and they're spread across Ahmedabad and places like Palitana and Dhangadra and other places. And they're from a paradigm of familial practice. They're kind of situated outside or on the margins of the professions, or the institutionalized profession of architecture, I should say. They have an expertise in designing and producing temples, which are load-bearing stone, but they're also highly versatile in other kinds of technologies. And actually, when we were putting this presentation together, I thought it was really interesting how here, even though they're dealing with stone and the kind of permanence and heaviness with stone, the kind of technological realm is shared with bamboo and these kinds of lighter technologies on which there's a kind of dependency and which I thought was very interesting. So they are a highly agile and versatile community. They work across religions, and that's a very key point. They're open to sources, they're open to technologies, and their contingencies of contexts and sites. But they're also participating, I think, which I like to say this, this participation is like a dialogue with their ancestors. They're drawing on kind of immediate ancestors' works, their dads and granddads and great-granddads. So that's a site in Palitana in Shatrunjay, mid-19th century. And some families can trace their great-great-great-great-grandfathers to this point. But they're also kind of looking further back into older examples of temples and looking at these as resources. And the other resources they're dealing with very kind of very comprehensively and very intensely are also codifications. And particularly in the 1930s, there are published versions of codified knowledge which come into play, which have an illustrative dimension to them. And the other resource is, of course, the family realm. And just to kind of give you a sense of the kind of broader research, which is now I'm just completing a book on the Sompuras. The broader research is about their experience of modernity through key moments of change that they have experienced. And it deals with encounters with notions of antiquity. It deals with encounters with modern notions of history and antiquity, institutions like the ASI and modern profession of architecture. Also recording a sense of being left out in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, and these new professional emerging domains, and an immense coming together in the early 30s as a community through illustrative manuals. One of them is a Shilpa Ratnakar, which I'll talk about later. And the work also deals broadly also with what happens to this quite a familial and small community in the 1990s when it comes in contact with global capitalism and with the opening of the Indian economy, when there's a boom in temple commissions and they have to really reorganize themselves and bring other constituencies into the fold. And those are the Adivasis and Dalits of Pindwara in southern Rajasthan. And in all of this, drawing starts to have quite a critical and significant place in their imaginary and in their practice. But there is also an understanding that these drawings, when they are in connection, when they are seen in relation to the building site, they're quite limited actually, and there's something else takes over. So that's kind of an accepted thing. And in everyday life, they are dealing with the constraints of society. Drawings are a communicative practice. They're also, you mentioned contracts and bills of quantities. They're also drawings used to determine economic values, the weight of things, quantities of stone, kinds of carving that might go on them, and those are also tied to economic values. They're used to interpret clients' demands. They're also used to organize workforce. And when this organization, and it's not in all cases, when this organization of the workforce comes in contact with accumulation and power, these drawings can also alienate some and elevate others. So there are kind of all sorts of complications also happening with the kinds of drawings that they do. They're also used as tools to communicate with people who carve. And there's an interesting point here that before the 1980s, it was the Sompura community who were carving, but with this explosion of temples across the world and in India, essentially other constituencies come into play. So I thought I'd pick up one drawing that registers this change, and thanks, Saptarshi. So this is a full-size drawing produced by the Trivedi family in Ahmedabad. It's a full-size construction drawing, and it was produced in I think should be the mid-90s. It's for a structure that was completed in 1995. It's a detail of an arch of a mandap, which is a kind of assembly hall at the base of the sacred hill of Shatrunjay in Palitana. And when I went, so this drawing was taken down from a very high level cupboard in 2015 when I met this family, and brought out and spread on the floor. And while my colleague and I kind of scattered around to the side and placed ourselves on the stone, a grandson of great-grandson of the people who made this drawing walked all over it in his socks, and handling it quite roughly, but at the same time quite knowingly. Sorry, Saptarshi, can you just go back? So it's made as a production drawing. It's made by jointing large pieces of paper, and is about a certain type of sociality, because with digital drawing, which comes into play in mid-1990s, this kind of practice totally gets abandoned. But it's about taping up very, very large sheets of paper, and family members crouching. You need at least 3 people to make this drawing on the floor, and then producing it very slowly. Then the drawing has to be dispatched to site. So that means basically copying it over pieces of carbon paper. We're talking in an era where there weren't any photocopiers at that point, or some such sort. I remember them saying that they are tracing over sheets of carbon paper. So it gets extremely laborious. And the copy is sent to the site, and the original stays at home. And it's really interesting. They're quite relieved that they don't have to do this anymore, because this digital drawing enables another kind of a comfort, so to speak. But the full-size drawings are also sites from where they think about what their ancestors might be doing in the 7th century, 12th century. So this conception of drawing on large-scale drawings, full-size drawings on stone, comes into play. And I was also just thinking about Adam Hardy's chapter in his recent book, where the stone is the quarry and the drawing board, so to speak. So these kinds of conversations happen around these paper drawings in contemporary times. And there are also kind of very interesting conceptions around drawings and digital fabrication. So that's CNC fabrication, where there are no paper drawings produced. So in very interesting ways, there's a circularity between something that was taking place quite some time back before paper became a tool for practice. And there's something quite peculiar about the status of these drawings, because they can't be digitized. Many of the other drawings are digitized and used by younger members of the family, but these can't be digitized because the frailty of the paper, and there are no scanners that big. but also they can't be shared. This is where family identity is crystallized. So in a sense, they also concretize what is the familial and the non-institutional. It needs to remain so, in a sense. So thank you.
Thank you both. I think these were some great starter visuals and yeah, explanations of these building cultures. And I think what struck me is if we want to compare the two cases, but what's striking is how Samantha's journal is like, it seems to be a relatively personal instrument for him to reflect on both his surveying but also his design process. And he seems to move in a very agile manner between surveying, drawing, writing, prototyping with bamboo. And I think that's something that we see in the quality of the drawings in the journal. And Megha, on the other hand, how you spoke about the drawing as a collective process of making, which involves an entire family coming together to actually accommodate the format of this large size drawing, and which goes back to a very long tradition. I think that really reflects in the material qualities of the drawings. I also was struck, Megha, by how you said that on site something else takes over. So these drawings have both a role to play in the imaginary and in the practice on the site. So I think the next question is related to that, because we know that in the Sompuras practices, these drawings are used to produce or make a permanent building of stone and mortar, while Bimal Samantha's Pandal is a temporary structure. So in what ways do these targeted outcomes determine the amount of detail their drawings need to contain? What do they include? What do they leave out? Is that dependent on the temporal framework we're working with? Or do you think other factors like the distance between designer and maker or thinking and doing also determine how finely grained the contents of these drawings are? So maybe Shati can first respond to this question.
Why don't Megha, you go first, okay? Because I
Okay.
also have a question for you, Megha. When you say something else takes over on the site, what does? Could you describe
Yeah.
that a bit? So I'll let Megha go first, and then we can.
Okay, so I'll go in. I just wanted to say I'm part of this project as well, this production studies project, and this is all we talk about, what happens in this hidden abode for years and years. This is kind of been but anyhow, okay, so yeah, I mean, the thing is, they are permanent buildings, yes. They are valued for their permanence as well. So the intended lifespan of these buildings is 1,000 years if built properly. I mean, none of us are going to be there to witness this, but that is the intention. It's not 65 years. And they are also associated not only with permanence, but also longevity. So basically, that's there, and there are. There's also something else very interesting happening, and I think it's about kind of claiming a kind of a domain of autonomy as well. They don't use, and they stress not using ferrous metals in these buildings. So this is also a coded way of saying, hey, we don't use reinforced concrete. We can do if you want us to make a temple, but we will do it. But that's not. But that's not proper, but we can do it. But also no ferrous metals, and that's there. So that implies that things like, the non-stone bits, the foundations suddenly become very, very heavy. So in other words, these things are heavy, they need deep foundations, they leave a trace. And also, they're very, very expensive things compared to the sorts of things Shati's talking about. And also, they are often aligned, but not always, I would say, aligned with power and wealth. And they have to be cut into. So unlike the jointing system that you're describing, Shati, they are being cut into. They have to be notched. The notching has to be very precise. All of this has to be, the jointing has to be quite precise, because there are standards of workmanship. And there are also distinctions between building on site and building off site. So if you're carving the stone and cutting and carving the stone on a building site where this thing is in front of you, then the affordances that affords more tolerance. And there's a bit of going backwards and forwards. You can do a bit of that. You can modify things on site. You can improvise as you talk. But from the 1990s, we're in this world of off-site construction. These things have to be produced within shipping deadlines and then shipped far away. And when they arrive, they're packed in certain ways, unpacked, and they're assembled in other places. They have to fit very, very precisely. So precision is quite a technological concern here. So there's these two modes. And with the advent of the drawing, the digital drawing, each stone is drawn in profile and dimensioned. Each stone, so you can think there are hundreds of thousands of pieces of stone. Each stone is being profiled and dimensioned and numbered and located on a plan. And I have other articles which deal with these kind of plans. They're called layered drawings. I haven't brought them up here. So there is this kind of management thing going on. And at the face of all of this, they leave no ambiguity, these drawings. But at the same time, they're merely inscriptions, and someone has to interpret them and transfer them onto the stone. This is where the Sompuras then become entirely kind of knitted into a community of supervisors and stone carvers. Often the drawings are, so there's a knowledge space, there's conversation, knowledge space, there's embodied relations that come in translating these drawings, effectively saying the drawing is very limited. And often these drawings are supplanted with plaster of Paris models, clay models, also with templates. They are ways of, you can think of them as ways of kind of retaining control in some situations, but they're also ways of communicating qualities and standards totally beyond the drawing. And many times, images come into play. Okay, here's a drawing of a carved element that we saw in the last slide, but here it has a kind of three-dimensional reality to it. And sometimes it's pictures, photographs, sometimes visits to favorite temples with a karigar, with a stone carver, and spending immense amount of time absorbing these sorts of qualities. So these sorts of practices come into play. So if we just, I thought, we could just look at this through an example in the article, Living in the Archive. Maybe Saptarshi, if you can bring up the Narasimha Avatar ceiling panel. So the context is the repair of this broken temple in, this happens in the 1950s. And what happens is that for 12 years, Balubhai, the protagonist in this article, Balubhai and his family, Amritlal Mulshankar Trivedi, who's a legendary figure in this Sompura community, the whole family moves to Mount Abu in Dilwara, and they are on a construction site for 12 years, essentially repairing this temple. It's full of, there was an earthquake in the mid-19th century, and then there were previous renovations, and so there's a huge amount of work to be done. And it's a massive episode in their lives, actually. In fact, Balubhai calls it his art school. He uses the English word, this is my art school. This is where I learned, we all learned, or this is where we were prepared. Hum yahan taiyar hue. And in this, it's kind of drawings come into play. A whole new system is devised to repair these ceilings and various architectural elements. across two temples, the Luna Vasahi and the Vimal Vasahi temples. They're both 12th century and 13th century temples. And I think it's critical to say that this new approach is it's completely at loggerheads with what is considered, proper conservation practice at that point. So Claude Bartlett is involved as an advisor and a dear friend of the patrons who are shelling out for this renovation. Jeronodhar is the right word. And Bartlett says, well, no, you can't touch any of these. Let them let them remain as they are. And he's, of course, he's concerned that there's not enough craft or skill available to repair these temples, but actually he's totally working in line with kind of conservation codes which were devised in the early 20th century, and through sweeping pieces of legislation like the AMPA, the Ancient Monuments Preservation Act of 1904, and then the Conservation Manual, Marshall's Conservation Manual of 1923. And there's also a backstory. There's another first kind of flourish of renovations that take place around 1901, and that's instigated by basically cousins, Henry Cousins and Marshall, and all kind of acting under the viceroyalty of Curzon. So it's already had one period of repair, and it's been deeply frustrating for colonial archaeologists going there, because that whole idea of conservation is not being stuck to, and they're doing essentially the codes, the conservation codes, as is well known, treated material objects completely differently to living practice. So they make this distinction. So anyhow, so in this new approach in the 50s, the approach is basically, in order to fix something like this, the approach is basically to say you protect as much as is possible, but you make new marble insertions in a broken ceiling like that. And the key aim, the bigger aim, is to make the joint between the old and the new imperceptible. And what's, I think, kind of really interesting is that the value of there's a kind of appreciating these structures as antiquated fabric as well. I mean, often we think of Sompuras and other kind of indigenous communities as not valuing somehow age, the value of age. But here they are looking at it as an antiquated structure. They are appreciating it for it, and but also kind of inserting new bits, and then saying, okay, we need it to look old as well, so we will do some artificial staining. So we'll rub some oil and mitti, and there's a kind of combination of things. So it's kind of really interesting how this kind of idea of antiquity gets recoded and becomes an act of devotion and a way into devotion, as well as kind of an appreciation of art. And the method is kind of, I've talked about it in a lot of detail, but it involves sitting on a machan, which is like a scaffold under the ceiling, and looking up. So first you draw the broken ceiling, then then you come down, and then you imagine it as a complete piece of work. So that's where the drawing comes in, and there's an example of a drawing in the chapter. And essentially it involves a little bit of research, might involve needing consulting your community or text, so getting into that particular story of Narasimha Avatar. It's Narasimha slaying Hiranyakashyap, so kind of figuring out various attributes, the Vahan, the etc., vehicle, etc. And then okay, so here's a sketch. Then the sketch is given to the people who are experts at the next bits. So, but it is important to kind of let them know, okay, this is what we have in mind. So then a clay modeler comes in and completes the ceiling, all the broken elements, little minute things. And then what happens? The clay is brought down to the ground, and then wax is poured over the clay models. And then the clay is taken out, and then plaster is poured into the wax model. And then the wax model is broken, and you have this plaster model, which are all of many of these bits. And then somebody comes along and carves that on stone, and then that is stuck on with cement. So there's a huge, this idea of what something else happens after the drawing. This is the kind of knowledge space that kicks in at a very kind of deeply practical level. So that's it. Thank you.
It's fascinating that the sort of the durational parameters here are so different between what you're looking at and what I'm looking at, I think.
Yeah.
But at the same time, those are meant to last for a long time, like a long temporal horizon. And these are necessarily short temporal horizons. But what I find interesting is how the drawing is doing a very different kind of work than we would normally expect in an architectural, like a professional architectural process, right? So here the drawing is in almost like, in this case, what you're saying is like in the case of the repair, it's a trace. It's really tracing, right? And then imagining from it what can be done. But you're not necessarily completing it in the drawing. Okay, in this case,
No.
okay, this is just a repair case. You're not building a new structure. But Bimal Shamant, or those who do those kinds of drawings for puja panels, they are mostly, and Sarah, you're right, they're mostly for their own thinking process, because they are working with materials, unlike the Sompuras, they're working with materials every time because this is the desire for novelty. You're trying to experiment with different kinds of materials. You really don't know how those materials will behave. So there's a lot of experimentation that goes in. Before and during the building as, okay, that works, that doesn't work. Okay, how are you going to do it? And there is a very fast sort of a learning process that happens between the designer and the crew on the ground, and they're very close to each other. I mean, in other words, there is a core crew that pretty much every designer would have. So they are sort of they can lead the work on site. But I have been astonished, and I've spent quite a bit of time, with the crew while they're building, of how fast they learn techniques, how fast they, can improvise, and they would do things by themselves without Bimal telling them because they have to make it. So he said, "Okay, this is what I want to do," and they would do it on site. And I like something that completely blew my mind. I have to say, it's like, wow, the skill that kicks in. And skill is not something you already have. It is in process. You sort of demonstrate it in through the process. And that fascinated me because I learned a lot from how, in terms of, what Shaptashi, the quote you did, made from my article, thinking about where contingency, chance, experimentation completely rules over the structure, the pre-planned. Okay, so it's not like something has not been planned, but what does that make a plan or planning, right? It changes the conception of planning. Planning is, it's really a projection, but it is not something that you have predetermined. So that the lack of predetermination gives these structures sort of versatility as kind of a what I would call fun aspect, a discovery aspect that you normally would not have a typical building, which is you can appreciate a regular building the way we have been trained to do for all sorts of good reasons, but not because I have no idea how they put that together. One year that you used the leaves of the betel nut tree, and I'm going like, that's not a structural material. how the heck do you build with that? That's not a structural material. It doesn't have strength. But they did manage it, and like that fascinated me. And they're not only using that, they're also using wood and bamboo. What they're after is an effect. They want you to say, wow, just because of the play of materials, just because what you feel right at that. And it's a very momentary, experience. So I love there's something very different about the use of drawings, but there is something similar in terms of their very notional almost sort of role in both of these, because it is in practice in both of these that you really see what we call architecture means.
Thanks, Shati and Megha. I think I'm almost able to connect what you both said in terms of how the drawing mediates temporality in different ways, and especially, and I think that the idea of longevity that you mentioned, Megha, and then that has a direct implication on how the process is done. And similarly for the pandal, the fact that the betel leaves are it's possible to use them. One can speculate because that has to last for 5 days and not like 500 years. So there is that aspect of contingency that comes in. So since the clock is ticking, I'm gonna just move into one of the final questions, which we're going to put to you separately. So I'll first bring in Shati. And, one of the common things about both the Sompuras and, say, an actor like Bimal Shamanto is that they don't purely use drawings as a set of instructions, and both of you have said how there is so much that goes on at the building site. So the drawing is not this deterministic tool. But and I'll ask my first question to Shati, that you mentioned how Shamanto produced journals for each pandal design, and like each journal is for a particular pandal every year. And you also, and I'm going to quote you here, it's not just a handbook for himself to keep track of his process, but also it is about creating an archive. So the journal presumes and anticipates an audience. It constructs its own history, and I'll end the quote there. So do you think, Shati, that this act of archiving is related in some ways to claiming authority for the work and legitimizing the identity of somebody like Shamanto as a designer? So the other question that follows is, who could, for instance, comprise the anticipated and presumed audience in this case?
Shamanto's drawings, I mean, they are, Gauri also asked that question, and I responded saying that it's very much a personal archive, okay? It's really his thinking process. Some of them he'll use on site to explain, this is what I want, but, he's not tearing off sheets he doesn't take the journal to the site. He does not do that. It's very much, it's a personal archive. And it's a sort of it's really his thinking process, and he refers back to it when he needs to. He has a very clear sense of like an extreme clarity in terms of where things are, how he thought through this as opposed to that year. But when I looked at how carefully, disciplined manner he had done it, and the fact that he can always refer back to them, that's an archive. But that, and it's a little like, when you write an autobiography, there's always an audience. You may not know who that audience is, but there's always an audience. So I think of these as sort of the autos of the archive, rather than a sort of biographical, rather than archive as we think about there is an archon who is saying that this is what it must be. The rules are not set, because it is about recognition. I think at some point he imagines, just like when we write our autobiographies or memoirs, is that at some point, somebody will find this useful. He happens to have, at this point, as far as I know, through me, an audience of one, and then others, right? But he clearly, otherwise, why would you do that so systematically? if you do not anticipate an audience. Okay, so that was my reading. He would probably laugh at it. I've never asked him, why do you do this? It's like, because, well, for my thinking. I actually never asked him that question because that's my reading of his process and numerous conversations with him off-site, on-site, in terms of how he thinks through design. That's what I'm really interested in understanding, and the city.
So it does serve, for what you've said, a very active function. It's not like this passive repository that somebody else going to come in. It actually has that performative quality about it for himself to begin with, and then the future audience.
Because I think he wants, because he's so self-conscious about his design, thinking process. So when we discuss it, he can make clear reference to, okay, this is how I thought through this. And that fascinated me. And this is kind of like, again, untutored in some ways, okay? This is something that he had invented about how to do it, how to keep track of his ideas, and also the actual building process, the dates, so very precise. So the precision, but the drawings are also, they're not finished drawings, as we would say, right? They're all, not, and I wouldn't even call them conceptual drawings. They're somewhere in between. And it's kind of difficult to describe what they are. And that's why I think that this is what drawings truly can do, is the thinking process, right? So that's what they are. But they are also registers of, okay, this is where I was. Okay, my thinking has changed. This is what it's going to be. So he can actually do that. This is how I've changed my decisions in terms of design. So there's no fixity about them. That's what's their life, the dynamism of that, like, it interests me.
Yeah, and to begin on that, there's also this, so in Samantha's archive, so to speak, there's this idea of a future audience that may come at some moment in time. And in Megha's, you mentioned how the Sompuras created these handbooks to almost reclaim an audience, right? Like, because they have the story that they lost their audience and they have to use the drawings now to kind of reclaim this recognition. So I think that's also, again, this interesting play between both your case studies.
I had a little question as well for Shati. I don't, wait, were you going to jump on to the next question, Sarah?
Oh, please go ahead. We can get to it later.
There is something in your article about big names also doing these pandals, right? So I was wondering if we can pick this up later, but if your protagonist is in touch with them and has some kind of ambition of heading in that direction. But anyway, that question came through my mind.
In the Durgapuja circuit, Bimal Shamanto now is a big name.
Right.
Make no mistake.
So he's there now.
He's very well known. Okay.
So it might have functioned also as a way to obtain new projects. Maybe, I don't know. Did he show this?
It's actually, I had to seek permission to reproduce the drawings because I know it's a very personal archive. It's not shared. I've never seen his drawings reproduced anywhere else. So, but, because I'm trained as an architect, and he finds, I think, our conversations useful, meaningful in some sense. But there is communicative aspect about his drawing. He's like talking to himself, and that is, when I look at the drawings, I actually can infer a lot of interesting things, and like how he thinks about that site. It completely changed my notion of how you can think about a site, or how panel designers think about a site. It's not the way architects are trained to think about the site at all. Okay, and this is what fascinated me about for me, what is the learning process, right? What is design in here?
Okay, if we want to, for our last question, come back to the archive. And Megha, you mentioned in the beginning, the first time we spoke about how in your fieldwork you discovered that the Sampura home is an archive, but it's one not just because of the fact that drawings and architectural fragments are stored there, but you really see, and I quote here, the domestic setting as an effective and active archival realm, comprising also narrations and spatial practices. So how does such a lived archival realm, also an intergenerational household, as you mentioned, become a point of reference for or inhabit the practices of the newer generations who have transitioned, as you mentioned, into digital temple production? How does that home as an archive still play a role?
Yeah.
There's also a follow-up question, because in the article you write about how the colonial archive is collapsed into the family archive. And I was interested to know, would those codes get reconfigured in the digital world, or is there, is there no trace of that aspect anymore, or is there? Thanks.
Okay, thanks. This is a big, really massive question, so I'll try to be as quick on. I mean, you used the word you discovered in your field work. It was a discovery which took a few years actually, which is a bit bizarre because I'm going to the same place. And I've been introduced to Vallubhai as this person who can talk to me about Purani Baatein, old things, because all the rest of the people are quite busy in their practice, in their offices. So they sent me to him, and they said, yes, there's some drawings you can have, maybe have a look if he's. So we're looking at these drawings, and over the years, it's totally, I had this kind of realization that it'd be really reductive actually if I just focused on these drawings. Because there is something going on. There's a realm here, and it's about him, his companionship, our companionship. All of these things come into play, and it's not just drawings, it's things stuck in the walls, models, samples, things displayed here and there. They all kind of come together. So yeah, it's Saposhi, maybe you can share the last image. Yes, so the younger generation have moved on into digital fabrication and digital drawing both. And they accord these processes that their fathers and grandfathers went through as a kind of knowledge base, and they benefit from the drawings and the narrations and the techniques actually. All of these, the narrations are as much as part of the scene as the samples and the drawings. And most of the drawings have been digitized. I won't be surprised if the sculptures have been scanned because scanners and things are all part of their repertoire actually, apart from those other drawings that I was talking about in the first slide. But what's interesting is that they've been incorporated into CAD libraries, and then they've been integrated into new drawings and new designs. And so there's this kind of very interesting, the digital and the ancestral come together in a present of practice in very interesting ways. So this is, yes, it's an active archival realm. It's not a dead family museum, but a place where objects are in use and they're collected, preserved, loved, venerated, and they're conduits of practice. And they're handled routinely, roughly, delicately, both. And they're also kind of understood in embodied ways. And this sample we see here, this is a sample for a seat. It has become a seat, but it's kind of a balustrade of a temple. And it was a massive technological moment in this family's history because the temple was being built on top of Mount Girnar, and they couldn't carry the stone, and there was a kind of funding issue. So they translated this technology into unreinforced concrete. So it was a big moment. So now it's the sample is now part of this kind of everyday life, and where kids and grandkids hang out together and go through these. And then people like me, researchers, come, and then those narrations are said again, and they kind of become part of this this transmission actually. And similarly for the columns. So yes, I think with this kind of digital element, there is an interesting collapsing of the past and the present into a present, and a kind of ready-to-hand quality where things are not seen as distant objects from the past. And your other question around this collapsing the colonial archive, there's another image we have, Shaptarshi. This is a colonial, this is an ASI drawing that's being integrated into this phenomenal text that appears in the 1930s, 1939. And it becomes basically, it becomes part of that text. There are about 20 such plates from the ASI which get integrated. And these drawings were produced, as you will know, as part of the whole project of knowing the colony, and then also telling the natives, so to speak, how to look after your own heritage, because you don't understand it. We're the ones who understand it. So these drawings are part of that kind of process of knowing the colony, but also teaching natives how to look after these antiquities. And it's kind of really interesting, again, that they were divorced from practice in the way that they were initially conceived of by the ASI. It's Henry Cousins, actually, who's drawn, and his native staff who've drawn these in Pune, and they're part of the Western India Circle's repertoire. And so I think, but these are just 20 plates in a text, in a code, which has hundreds of other kinds of drawings, and which are absolutely phenomenal in the sense that they were translations of Sanskrit verses into drawings. And this translation happens in the 30s, where one erudite, Sompura from Dhrangadra, it's called Narmada Shankar Sompura, decides to translate these drawings, translate the verses into Gujarati prose, because nobody knows Sanskrit, and also into drawings. And right now, these are in circulation. I haven't really shown, I haven't shown a picture of those drawings, but they're framework drawings. And yes, they are very much in use by contemporary practitioners, but it's the drawings that are in use, not the Sanskrit, not the Gujarati prose. And then those drawings are frameworks. They're not recipe books or prescriptive in any sense. They get adjusted, and they have their own life in their new context, so to speak. So these colonial codes, they're part of the text, and they're barely noticed, actually. They're so ubiquitous, actually. Their presence is really barely registered. And in other words, they're also so profoundly integrated into this world. So it's only when I ask, somebody might say, oh yeah, they got that drawing, and now they're showing Nandan Prasad of Kesharadi Jati. Yeah, let's move on. Let's look at the other things. And so it's kind of becomes part of everyday life. Yeah.
And who knows, now maybe circulating as a PDF and in digital form, who knows?
Yes, all of that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to apologize. I've just realized there's loads of questions here, and I haven't really addressed any, because I can't do three things at a time. So I'm really sorry. I don't know what to do about this, but
I think many of your explanations have answered some of the questions, and Shati has very kindly been replying to them in the chat on the site. So she's, I think Gauri's question has definitely been answered. And yeah, since we are a little short on time, I just want to very quickly, note how inspiring it is for us to see both these pieces of research, also the kind of meticulousness, the perseverance in conducting these very, very in-depth readings of the drawings and the production. So thank you very much once again for your responses. I will try and go through the chat and bring up one or two questions, which is, I think, all we have time for. And I encourage our audience to write to us with further questions, which we can post to the speakers, and they can answer in their own time. So, Megha, there are a couple of questions for you from Priya Jain, who wants to know, as and I'm asking this because I think you have an answer to this, that since the Sompuras are increasingly involved in temple building outside India, is there a difference they reported to you or they noted in those projects and their drawing practices when they're working in India? And you've partly answered that when you said
Yeah.
that these individual stones are detailed out and produced and shipped away to across the Atlantic or wherever.
Yeah, thanks, Priya. I'm sorry I didn't pick this up while this was going on. Yeah, the diaspora is an absolute game changer, actually, in this practice. And yes, they do differentiate between the diaspora and what's going on in India. Okay, there are multiple levels. First of all, I talked about this idea of when you're shipping things elsewhere, this kind of idea of precision comes in, and it kind of changes your idea of or their idea of how things are produced, because everything has to fit, everything has to be cut very precisely, and the regimes of labor are slightly kind of different. And one other very interesting thing that happens with projects in the diaspora, and actually even projects within India which are being trucked, where stones are being trucked to transported to different parts. What they do is something called dry fitting. So all the stones are carved, cut, and then basically they're fitted on site, and they make sure everything fits, and then they're unpacked and numbered and then packed, undone and packed and sent away. So there are differences whereas this kind of thing would happen less on a building site, where you can quickly run up to the emerging building and kind of take measurements, and there's a kind of idea of accommodation. But in terms of designs, well, I think there's tremendous kind of how shall I say? I think they're constantly trying to innovate within this framework of these texts and these examples, and their clients put very strange demands on them, strange in their and so I think your question about differentiation between India and temples abroad is interesting, because I think there is a bit more there is a bit more improvisation and testing of newer terrains and other things that they probably may not be able to do here to a greater extent. There is a bit of that going on, and also the conditions in the diaspora are maybe the particular conditions are slightly different. I had one temple architect tell me that they've used Siddhi Sayyad's Jali in such and such mandir in the UK as now you see this kind of interreligious or cross-religious kind of practice. It is within their practice. They work across these kind of hard divides that you typically see in the mode of the nation state. They work across these, but it's very difficult for them to articulate that. More so probably now in India, but somehow when so I think there is a bit more scope to do things slightly more differently. And I think my favorite example is the Sanatan Hindu temple in Wembley, which is really kind of almost unprecedented in terms of typologies and the kinds of things going on in London. And the different communities are putting in money to raise this temple, and they all have their different requirements which somehow need to be accommodated. So yeah, I think they have a bit more leeway to experiment.
Megha, there is another question for you from Nina Zucchi, but I want to actually bring in Isa Sheikh's question, which was asked first. And Nina, I encourage you to read the article we have shared, because she's asking that you mentioned Adam Hardy and what, if any, is the role of an architectural treatise in the preparation of drawings. So I think you've addressed this question in the article in some detail, right?
I think, yeah, I think you should read the more recent stuff by Adam Hardy. And in particular, there's this book called Theory and Practice of Indian Temple Architecture in Medieval India. It's this book. I don't know if you've seen it. It's 20, I think. Chapter 2 of that is absolutely amazing because it looks at this unfinished temple in outside Bhopal, and it looks at these full-size drawings which are cut into the rock, and they are the templates
temple,
for.
right? Yeah.
Sorry?
The Bhojpur temple.
The Bhoj, yeah, Raja Bhoj.
Yeah.
And so it's an unfinished temple. So he's talking about that, and then, but yes, there are. I've talked a little bit about this in this article, but yeah, these treatises.
Also, your last response really called to mind Shati's previous work on Durgapuja and Unlearning the City, where you speak about these fungible geographies and the diaspora, right, and the shipping of idols from Kolkata's Kumotuli to different parts of the world. Anyway, since Isa has asked, Isa, is your question directed at a one particular panelist or to both? So he asks, I think this might be for you, Megha, as well. In the 19th century, how was the drawing shared with various contractors or engineers and architects before digital drawings? And he also adds, was local language a barrier in understanding the details or fixing the drawings? I hope I've understood the question correctly. Isa, you're welcome to actually just jump in quickly and ask your question.
Yeah, sure. Can you listen to me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello. Okay, so thing is that like in current times, how we have like AutoCAD's Beam and all, where architects come together on one drawing, like there will be mechanical engineer, there will be structural drawing, and then there will be many other people like plumbing, electrical, they come together, sit in one drawing and make the drawing, right? But in like 19th century, somewhere around in last of 1800s, there was like I saw only one plan. I was just trying to understand how the other fixing, like the plumbing, the flooring, and how these other people used to work on one common drawing. So that was my first question. Was the drawing taken like, was it like negotiated in a way where everybody understood with one common drawing? Or was it like there were like multiple drawings of the same building? So that was my first question. And second question, in very recent time when I was trying to understand how domes are made, so many times architects or the local engineers, they wrote in Marathi or might be some local language. So the labor will understand how to construct these domes. It might be through the steel bracing, it might be through reinforcement and then putting a cement on top of it, removing a jack or something. So somewhere was it using a local language was a hindrance sometimes of benefits? That was my second question. Is
Shati, I'll let you go first.
I don't think this the question is really addressed to me. I think it's addressed to you, Megha.
yes.
But I would.
Yeah,
Oh, is it addressed to me?
Because what the space that I'm looking up, Bengali is the dominant language, right? So if any communication needs to be, and Bimal writes a little in English, that's not his first language. A little in English, some words, but it's really in Bengali because that's his first language. Okay, but he's not using them as sort of communication with the crew or organizers, nothing like that. So it's a very different kind of drawing. And what I find useful in there, because of his sort of annotations, where he's bringing attention to how he's touching the build, how his structure it will actually impinge on the other buildings, of how he's thinking about the breeze, how he's thinking about light reflecting with the rain, etc. All that stuff you don't, all the what I call the wonderfully ephemeral stuff that we all understand about, our environment, but we don't register in architectural drawings. That is very important to him because he's attentive to that, the temporariness of the event and its ability to make you feel in a certain way, like experience the building in a certain way. So, but Megha, I think that question is really for you.
Okay. Okay, so with the Sompuras, well, the thing is, I'd like to know more about the 19th century 19th century temple building practices and drawings, but I don't have the evidence, and I sounds like a poor answer, but in this archival realm in Ahmedabad, there were drawings that go as far back as 1924, and I saw a survey drawing and done in a quite a European kind of manner, actually, with borders and title blocks and a north point of the Kumbharia temples. And they're actually infrastructural drawings. They're mapping out roads and culverts and things like that, as well as, where the temples are. So I think there may have been a kind of plan to develop these things. So, but they must be, I mean, they are definitely, I mean, currently, they have to, in the current practice, they have to coordinate with structural engineers increasingly, although that used to be their domain, but with monumentality and all kinds of new changes, and they have to coordinate with architects, and especially in the diaspora. So they have to coordinate with architects and structural engineers and M&E people, although temples don't tend to have, I mean, they have some kind of drainage points, I think, but very minimal plumbing requirements, and the electricals are kind of worked out on site, and they tend to be, well, quite dark spaces anyway. So I think it's a really interesting question, but I can't answer it quite precisely. And I think the place to go to, I don't know if there's anybody in this audience who's looked at the temples in Shatrunjaya, in Palitana carefully, and is doing any work, because I would have thought that is an incredible place to study. They're all mid-19th century temples, all built in stone, and you might find some clues there. And these, so also it's kind of interesting also that this question of language is really interesting, because at least the drawings that I have seen from the 20s, the 30s, the 50s, they all use Gujarati and transliterations of English words into Gujarati. So they are talking to the drawings, whatever function, limited function they have, they are about kind of community, kind of milieu, which is understanding these drawings and the language. So I don't know if that makes sense.
I think you have provided some kind of an answer, or pointed us in the right direction with that, Isa. I hope you've taken notes. But I'm afraid that is all the time we have for questions. And once again, I'd like to thank Shati and Megha for making time for Patio at rather short notice, if I may add.